Chronicles now transmitting.
Welcome to the Tate Chronicles on Healthcare Now Radio. And now, here's your host, Jim Tate.
Good day, citizens of the free world. From border to border, coast to coast, and to all the ships at sea, I bring you a warm welcome. This is your correspondent, Jim Tate, and thank you for tuning into the Tate Chronicles. Join me as we cut to the fog that exists at the leading edge of healthcare technology and delivery. I'm very pleased today. My guest is Nigel Ohrenstein from Lumeris. Nigel manages Lumeris' business development and operations in the eastern half of the U.S. He has extensive healthcare experience in operational business development and helps healthcare organizations make the journey from volume to value-based care. He's a subject matter expertise in such areas as population health and revenue management, value-based care, physician compensation, care management, and provider engagement. Nigel is also a fellow comrade, I'm glad to say, on the Healthcare Now Radio Network. Nigel, welcome to the Tate Chronicles.
Jim, thanks for having me. Appreciate you having me on your show.
You know, one of the things that is really timely about you sharing some of your experiences and thoughts now, Nigel, is where we are in the COVID situation. I recently read a article or blog post you wrote called Come Back with Confidence, a pathway for health systems to restore revenue and long-term sustainability. And that brought up a couple of issues for me. And I look forward to getting into that. This sudden and deep impact that we've experienced that continues on healthcare business models is really without precedent in our lifetime. Business models that evolved over decades have been swept away in a matter of weeks. And so the first thing I'd like to hear your thoughts on, Nigel, is what impact has the COVID pandemic had on U.S. healthcare systems? It's a tall order, but I'd like you to reply.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. So clearly a dramatic impact on the healthcare system. You know, just some basic, data alone illustrates that inpatient volume is down almost about 20%. Outpatient volumes down, about 35%. Projected losses for health systems is over $300 billion. So the impact, sort of what I would consider the financial impact to the healthcare system, has been quite traumatic, which is unusual because normally the healthcare system weathers a downturn in the economy relatively well, right? We always talk about healthcare as being recession-proof, but clearly it's not pandemic-proof. And so the financial impact has been significant. But to me, that's only part of the story. If you think about other parts of the story, I live in New York, right, which has clearly been an epicenter. And so the trauma that certain frontline, nurses, doctors, caregivers, delivery folk have faced as it relates to going about their day-to-day work has been quite significant. And so you have the experience of those that have been in the epicenter as opposed to those that have not been, and obviously others are now experiencing that as well. That's sort of another angle. The angle that I also think is really important to think about as you think about the impact on the U.S. healthcare system is the concern about, who's foregoing necessary treatment because they're scared to go into a hospital. Who's not being diagnosed for cancer, right? What critical treatments are not happening, and what's going to be the long-term impact of that on the human toll side? Another topic that concerns me enormously is the spike in mental health issues, right, and suicide rates. Mental health is a growing problem that gets not enough exposure. It's increasing amounts of exposure, but not enough. And so that, the pressure, the stress, the impact that has on mental health is probably enormously important and something that I think we'll see a long tail to sort of the impact on U.S. healthcare coming out of that. And then the final point I'd make is sort of, the young and healthy that are, or even the the not so young and healthy who are not getting, preventative medicine, not going in for diagnosis, maybe women not going in for breast cancer screenings and the like. And so the failure of not doing preventative medicine, I think we're going to have a long-term impact. I think straight in front of us, we see this economic impact.
One thing that you mentioned, Nigel, is the whole concept of delayed care. And two parts of that, of course. One is health, that if preventative wellness issues are delayed, things that maybe would not be caught early or not be caught early. And so the idea that once we're on the other side of this, somehow all that's going to be made up quickly and there'll be no long-term results, I think, or impact. I think you've given a good reason why that is cause for alarm. Another issue, of course, was the financial side, because literally in a matter of a couple of weeks, all elective procedures were canceled in this country. And for many hospital systems, that kept them afloat. It was those elective procedures. Even though they were medically indicated, like maybe having a knee replaced or a shoulder replaced, people could certainly probably delay that for a few months. But for a hospital, 3 or 4 months or 6 months of those delayed elective surgeries and procedures had an overwhelming impact on really their bottom line. And it came, like I say, over just a couple of weeks. Really no time to even plan for it. I mean, it was just, hospitals, like most large organizations, like to see what's coming ahead 18 months, and they see how the government reimbursement is going to change, and they can adapt and plan for it. There was no way this could be planned for. It just happened literally overnight. That's been a real shock to the system. So such things, even as all the elective procedures, things that have to do with wellness, such as Medicare eligible individuals who are able to get an annual wellness visit. And certainly they don't want to go into an office. Clinical people don't want to go into somebody's home to do that. So I'm sure that there's at least 3 or 4 months backlog in those kind of procedures, where it's just an annual wellness visit, which is paid for by Medicare. So how have, whether it's hospital systems or private practices or consortia of physicians, tried to cope with what actually was the collapse of their business models? It may come back, but it did collapse. How have they tried to cope with this? What have they done to keep afloat?
So it's actually fascinating, and healthcare obviously is one, but we're seeing it in many other sectors as well, as how you have to, overnight pivot your business model. And sometimes that impacts obviously not just the delivery, but sort of all the supply chain all the way through from the start to the end customer. And we've seen people pivot. As it relates to healthcare, the most dramatic thing we've seen is the adoption of telehealth, which is, long overdue, but it was like pulling teeth beforehand to get physicians to adopt a telehealth platform. You maybe had 3-4% adoption, and now you're seeing almost 100% adoption of telehealth, which is truly incredible in terms of the transformation in that regard. And so they're figuring out how they can deliver a visit. And is it always as good as in person? Perhaps not. But does it get you, 60, 70, 90% of the way there? Probably does. I mean, I can give you a personal example. My son, needed a visit during the pandemic, and we set up a telehealth visit, and it was just such a less stressful experience than going into the office, irrespective of a pandemic. And so I had to be on because he's under 18. And as I mentioned before, I live in New York, so we would previously have had to travel in rush hour, pay tolls, find parking, go to the physician, probably wait in the physician's office for 30 minutes, 40 minutes till we're seen. The whole experience, he'd be late for school. I would be rushing for work. This time around, we got a text alert from the physician that she was running about 10 minutes late. Didn't really matter because we were sitting at home, and so we carried on our existing business. We logged on. It was an excellent encounter. We covered everything we needed to cover, and at the end it took about 25-30 minutes of time, and then we logged off and we were straight back into our daily routine. And so the convenience of it, the opportunity to interact in a way that saved everybody time and money was incredibly more efficient. And yes, was it perhaps not quite as good as being in person? You could argue that, but was it good enough? Without a shadow of a doubt. And so I think that's obviously one major impact to how people have changed the way they operate and interact with consumers. And so what I think we'll see is, and perhaps the moral of this, one of the many morals of this pandemic is that the healthcare setting needs to evolve, right? And so what can be delivered in the home, right? What can be done by the patient that previously was not done by the patient? And so now I'll give you an analogy from a different industry. I'm always fascinated by IKEA, right? It's taken jobs that were previously the prerogative of the supplier and passed them on to the consumer, namely collecting it and building it, right? And so, if you move back, before the world of IKEA, the idea that you would not have furniture delivered to your door and that somebody would come in and build it for you was really unusual. But now we all, not only are we happy to do it, we actually take quite amount of pride in picking it up and building it ourselves and taking on those jobs. And so I think as we think about healthcare, they're going to be jobs for the patient that we could take on that previously was the role of the clinician, and those will be enabled and furthered by tech. So I mean, at the most simplest case, when you go to the doctor for an annual visit, you get weighed, right? It's an easy thing that you could obviously do at home and have a Wi-Fi enabled scale that sends the amount in terms of taking blood pressure, all those types of things that are done by a nurse before you see a physician could easily be, with the right tech in the home, done at home, and actually those data sent to a clinician far more regularly than going in for a visit. So I think we'll see jobs move to the patient. We'll see settings change, and that, quite frankly, reduces the risk, because we always know you're most at risk for illness and infection is when you go into other healthcare settings. And so I think we'll see that evolution continue. Started, and we'll see that continue.
Nigel, it's the whole concept of telehealth has been fascinating to watch really since, I guess, March, because that technology has been sitting on the shelf, and very quickly providers had to find a platform, take it off the shelf, and start using it. And there have been very little adoption. So there was a learning curve and a comfort curve, which we, in a lot of respects, maybe have passed the pivot point where it's now becoming much more common. And what you mentioned about remote patient monitoring, whether it's folks with chronic diseases, diabetes, or congestive heart failure, or something like that, have those devices in the home that electronically gather that data and send that data. The door has really been opened for that through this pandemic. Let's talk a little bit about how legislation has helped. I know one giant thing that allowed the adoption was the parity between a lot of telehealth visits and face-to-face visits. So that is something that the telehealth industry had wanted for years. Who knows if they were ever going to receive it, but they did receive it under the emergency declaration. Do you think that parity of reimbursement, certainly from Medicare, is going to continue, or is there a chance that could be rolled back?
Yeah, I think it would be very unlikely it's rolled back, and obviously long overdue. But the financing of healthcare is so critical, like in many other industries, for sort of understanding behavior, right? And so Jim, as you correctly said, right, the reimbursement wasn't on par, and therefore as a clinician, you were more interested in bringing somebody to visit with you in person, even though that might not necessarily have been the most efficient way of doing something. And so I think that I'll be shocked if that is rolled back now, finally, after there's managed to be adoption. I think the other thing that's going to be fascinating to watch is long. For many years, a lot of patients have felt the best care is to show up to the brand name health system, because that health system, has a name and gives them a comfort level. And now they might suddenly be thinking, well, hang on a second, is that the safest place for me to go? I've got a couple of chronic conditions, and could I actually go to an outpatient center? Or could I, what could I do that was, what setting could I receive my healthcare in that's different? So I think that, one of the other thing that's been most fascinating from an evolution of healthcare perspective overall is Jim, as you know, the way physicians have historically been paid is what's called the fee-for-service system, where they just get paid to see people. And there's this movement, as you mentioned in the introduction, about myself and Lumeris, was that we are passionate about this move to value, and believe that will, on almost every metric you can provide, a value-based system is delivering better healthcare, more efficient, at the right setting. And so it's absolutely fundamental for the future of not just of our healthcare system, but also for our country, because healthcare is going to impact and bring down the competitiveness of every industry in this country. And so what we found here through this pandemic is that health systems and physicians, independent practices, have found that the safety they believed they had in this fee-for-service system does. And providers already moved to value and was in effect taking what's called a capitated payment, basically a lump sum payment to take care of those patients, and then were at risk for making sure that they took appropriate quality and cost care of that patient, have fared much better through the pandemic. And so my hope is that this also speeds up the move to a value-based healthcare system, because that will drive superior outcomes, better, more efficient, and ultimately a better healthcare system for our children and our grandchildren.
Well, that whole shift to really payment for value, that's a wave that's been underway for a few years, and it seems to be escalating, and it needs to. We've only got about 7 or 8 more minutes, Nigel, and so I want to get down to the details of your article, your blog post, Come Back with Confidence. You outlined a 3-part plan to come back with confidence. And the first part of that plan is to recover revenue. And so what are your thoughts about that? How do you find recovering revenue? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. So I think that as you think about, a health system, this was written for health systems, executives at health systems, and, your house is on fire. And the first thing you need to do, right, is put out, or limit the damage of the fire. And so the first thing I think they need to focus on is how do they get, as much revenue back into the system as possible. And so obviously the obvious thing they're all doing, right, is saying we're back open for elective surgeries and, come back. But what they're finding is that people aren't coming back as quickly as they as they thought. At best, I think they're finding they're at 70% of where they would normally be, and some are less. And they're not coming back because A, people are frightened. B, some of the elective surgery people said, maybe I could live with a bit of hip pain or knee pain or whatever else, right? Rather than, and so they're finding that people, so they need to invest in sort of the population health capabilities that drive better revenue. So, for example, most health systems have about 40% leakage outside of care that should remain in their system that goes outside of that system. And so focusing on things like that, focusing on sort of effective post-acute care as well. So I think those are some aspects of recovering revenue that are broader than just hey, we're back open for business. Let me do the traditional thing of pulling in the people that I traditionally would have seen. And Jim, we spoke about this offline before we started, about how business models need to pivot when they've been under attack like they have, and obviously it's not just healthcare that's been under attack. And so it's critical, even as they think about the core business of recovering revenue, that they think about how do they pivot to really focus on the areas that will drive the right revenue back into their system. And
that, what you just described, is probably number 2 in your plan of evolving the business model. That's the pivot. Your third part of the plan, kind of fascinating. You say identify regional frenemies. So those are friends who are also competitors. What are your thoughts on that? How's that a way to come back?
Sure. Yeah. And so just one other point on evolving the business model before I move to that frenemy. So then evolving the business model is really along the lines of what we just spoke about a few minutes ago, right? You really have to pivot to value. And that's not just changing the way you receive payments, but it's also changing the way you deliver care. I'll give you one example, right? How often does a hospital system, right, really manage their consumer relationships like a consumer-facing company does? So you think about, how much data and information that Amazon has, or Procter & Gamble, or any of the big consumer-facing companies, and how they think about customer service and the focus they put on it, right? Healthcare systems today have an enormous opportunity to really become customer-focused entities, and really that is one aspect of what will differentiate them. So evolving the business model is critical. And then the last part, as you mentioned, is I think what is really critical is that health systems realize that particularly as you think about it from a statewide perspective, you don't necessarily need to think of every health system as your competition, right? There are a number of opportunities to partner and collaborate with health systems that furthers your own mission and your mutual set of objectives. And so let me give you a couple of examples. You might say, you know what, I don't need to have this specialty inside of my system, right? It's not something that I'm particularly great at. I'm not the most high quality efficient. Maybe I have a relationship with ABC system, that's an hour away, and we send all of our patients that have this particular issue to you. But you know what? We're going to double down on this other specialty because we are the best in class at that, and not only are we the highest quality, but because we're so good at it, actually it's more efficient for the healthcare system because we have fewer adverse reactions, and we're better at managing it, et cetera, et cetera. That's one example. A second example, and perhaps the most critical, if I were to put the leader of a health system hat on, is that the insurance companies are also in a battle here for survival of their business model. And while 2020 actually has not been bad for them because of the reduction in care, 21 will be tough for them because again, just taking the job losses, the fewer number of employees they cover alone will have an impact. So the payers, the insurance companies, are in a battle for survival of their business model, and they ideally would like to make hospital systems commodities, right? It's just you go in, you get what you have and what you need, and you leave. And so, if I'm a health system executive, I think it's more critical than ever to think about how do I set myself up to be successful and create a sustainable business model. And part of doing that, in my view, is creating these relationships with other health systems around the state in particular. I'm thinking, particularly from a statewide perspective, but it could be as geographical region, depending on where you're located. And so, and that to me is absolutely critical, because as you think about the value delivered in the healthcare system, right? We can't operate and survive without hospital systems, right? They're absolutely fundamental to a healthcare system. There are certain things that will never happen in the home, right? I'm not going to get a heart transplant in the home, right? And obviously that's extreme. But even on less extreme cases, there are many things that won't happen in the home. When the functions of a middleman, an insurance company, really can be replicated with much greater ease. And so I think it's really critical that we think about what is the type of healthcare system we want in the future, and how do we go about creating that? And from my vantage point, the enabling healthy, successful, efficient hospital systems is a critical component of that.
Well, that is a good compilation of the major issues there, and I appreciate that, Nigel. We unbelievably are totally out of time, and so I would like to thank our audience for joining us on this episode of the Tate Chronicles. I offer a special salute to my guest, Mr. Nigel Ohrenstein of Lumeris. Nigel, thanks for coming aboard today.
Thanks, Jim. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
You can find more information on this show's program page at healthcarenowradio.com. Until we meet again, here's wishing you smooth sailing and safe harbors.
Tate Chronicles transmission ending now.